kinds of reasonable accommodation, whether it has to deal with height requirements, job restructuring, or anything else. Interpreters do fall under this category, and it is just one of those forms. However, the boss is the final decision on whether or not an interpreter will be used in a certain situation. Otherwise, a pen and paper or some other kind of communication can be used. Interpreters are used in many different situations. They can be used for meetings, evaluations, staff meetings, many other things. It really depends on the type of deaf consumer. For example, if there's another deaf individual there, an interpreter may not be needed. If your employer is refusing to comply, your only defense is called undue hardship, meaning that the employer must pay any type of accommodation not being given to a person with a disability. If your boss or employer says they can't afford it, that's not a good enough reason, because you're protected under law to be reasonably accommodated. Remember, that is called undue hardship. That falls under the first title. However, I'm going back to the second and third title, which will now be discussed together from here on out. There are two different titles starting with public. There's public entities and public accommodation. Many people get those confused, but they have quite different meanings from each other. Public entities public entities are involved in the local and state government. Accommodation is involved with private companies. The U.S. government enforces the responsibilities onto the Department of Justice to decide what constitutes as a qualified interpreter for the specific situation. Who is to decide to say which certification is the best? Do we consider people with an RID, national certification, qualified for a situation, or just a state certification? Plus, there are rural areas that have no form of certification whatsoever, so what do we do in those situations? This actually happened to me before. I was interpreting at a conference in Iowa. There was an interpreter there for me, but I was naive and didn't say that I wanted a certified interpreter before I got there. And so we looked all around Iowa City to try to find a certified interpreter. There was only maybe 2 or 3, and they were all busy. So they had to get 2 interpreters from Chicago to fly out and interpret for me at my conference.